My name is Bradley Hook. I worked with Joe and Startup Societies Foundation for some period of time. And about 2.5 years ago, after our last conference in San Francisco, we realized there was a lot of need in the for-profit sector for designing better systems for governments, particularly special economic zones and special jurisdictions. So what my role kind of became within our for-profit company, which is now Nuance Network, was designing our products that we were then taking to these different special economic zones and defining what technologies best fit. And we've now have a couple enterprise applications, one of which is a digital identity protocol, as well as kind of a quick start dashboard that allows for enterprise development. We really kind of took the perspective that each government is built differently, so the products need to be very modular and able to be customized for each one of them. And so that's about me. Sam, if you want to go next, and then we can kind of go around.
Sure. Thanks, Bradley. Hi, my name is Sam Cassatt. I have spent the last 5 or 6 years of my life as chief strategy officer of a company called ConsenSys, which basically seeded the Ethereum blockchain ecosystem. We started, I like to say, a little bit like 1991, when we knew that this blockchain thing would be interesting. We knew that, in 1991, people knew HTTP would be interesting, but there was really nothing built around it. So what we did is we built this venture studio that kind of seeded in funding, and also with things like policy initiatives, things like developer tools, et cetera, basically the first layer of the stack around Ethereum. And as we did that, we eventually built the capacity to consult for governments, central banks, Fortune 500 companies, and have done projects like property registries in Dubai. We've done identity systems in Switzerland, in the canton of Zug. And a lot of the ideas present, I think, in this panel and this event have intersected in interesting ways with blockchain technology. So we worked on that, and I think brought a lot of it into the forefront of the collective consciousness. And now, as of a few months ago, I left that company and I founded a venture capital firm called Aligned Capital, that's seeking to invest in the restructuring of societal institutions when they show their cracks, essentially. And I think a number of them are apparent at the moment. So happy to talk about it.
Awesome. Aaron, you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Aaron Voisine, president and co-founder of BRD, which used to be called Bread Wallet. It's a Bitcoin wallet app, and it's interesting in that it allows you to connect directly to these peer-to-peer cryptocurrency networks right from your mobile device. And I've been interested in economics and alternate governance systems for many years, as kind of and running in those circles as well. So, and that's actually how I first got interested in working on Bitcoin.
Awesome. Trent, be good to hear.
Yeah, great. Hey, I got a call out to both ConsenSys and Bread Wallet. Love you guys' services, have used them all. So this is a great panel to be on. I got my doctorate in computer science, went into industry to get a feel of what really it takes to improve society. And 2014, Patrick Byrne of Overstock.com dove into Bitcoin, and we started at that time with the capital markets, trying to fix things in Wall Street, and T0 is a part of that. So that's the Medici Ventures arm. And in 2018, we started Medici Land Governance, and our focus is to bring new technologies to all of the governance that come with land, especially in the major world, in developing countries, to help with transparency and all the issues there, especially with land security. I mean, we want to help people to be able to get the support of their governments and their neighbors and demonstrate their ownership and the right to live where they are. Thank you.
Awesome. So I have kind of Dennis's notes here, so I'm just going to kind of go through some of his talking points, and it looks like they're trying to bug fix his connection. So I guess the first thing he was going to talk about was defining eGov. So eGov 360.
Brad?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. Let's do an experiment. We are going to leave the system since you are also an admin. Then I'm going to let you stay with the admin. And then you please introduce our next speaker, Ini Ijinoluwa.
Okay.
Okay, because I think Hopin has a limitation with this particular setting. So we're here, okay? We're here, just not on stage.
Okay. Defining eGov 360, so challenges and opportunities. And I think kind of to dive in, as we've looked at a lot of these different developing regions around the world, Trent, I know you guys are doing some things in Africa as well as Latin America. Sam and Aaron, you guys have been, your apps have been influential kind of globally. When looking at developing regions, what are some of the big benefits that you see that are targeted for implanting these different systems?
Sure, I can take a stab at it. So, when you say developing regions, I think there's a distinction there that it's important to address in terms of technological capability. In some areas, you're just not going to have the infrastructure to be able to use a blockchain, for instance, right? And some people are trying to solve that with new technologies like mesh networking, et cetera. But I think in some developing economies, and just economies in general, if you were starting from scratch, like a startup society, for instance, I think there are opportunities to leapfrog the existing infrastructure. And what that view looks like, from the blockchain perspective and from ConsenSys perspective and Aligned Capital's perspective, is that if you rebuild the rails upon which you deliver government services in a way that is paperless. I'm in Puerto Rico right now, and I have to sign pieces of paper and go to notaries. In Dubai, for instance, there are something like 500 million kilometers driven a year just to move pieces of paper around between the government. Essentially, what you end up getting with a blockchain-based infrastructure is a public key infrastructure, which is very similar to what Estonia has done, right? They did it before blockchain was a thing, and I actually spoke to Tumis there a number of years ago, and he said, if we had done it again, we would have done it on blockchain, but we started before that. But you basically get a public key for I don't know. So you get a public key for everyone.
Hello, guys. Sorry for the technology issues. Yeah, continue, please. No worries.
All right. And once you have that public key infrastructure in place, then you get things like digital signatures. You get high security transactions that allow you to do things that normally require in-person meetings, physical signatures, stamps in the case of Dubai, for instance, like property registries, the ability to purchase property, the ability to take out loans against property as collateral. You end up being able to build an entire suite of services around what's now a very low cost, low trust infrastructure. And that's what we've tried to implement, globally in general. And I think the futuristic sci-fi idea here is if you take all those things that normally comprise the trust infrastructure of a government, which is partially what we're paying them for, is to be a trusted party, then you can start to lower the cost of all the other things that you do that interact with that trust infrastructure, whether it's banks or governments or anything else. So in short, that's my answer.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say, all of these areas are very receptive to any technological growth because they want to make things easier and get higher on the World Bank, report of economic, countries. So they have an indicator that says who's good for business. Rwanda is a good case for us. That they're very motivated. But what I'd like to riff off of is what Sam just said about PKI and the distributed technologies. Some of the places we work with are not centralized. They don't even have some of the electronic infrastructure, but we can still deliver to them devices where they can have signatures, or they can see where boundaries are, and then they can, leverage the trust. If they have keys associated with their tribe members or their leaders, then you can actually start to assert things at a local level on a more decentralized way. And then as that information becomes more important to, say, a larger jurisdiction, they can share that information, and it is something that's more secure. They'll be using things like mobile phones and other devices, but for me, the exciting part is being able to see ways that they can organically start communicating this information. It doesn't have to be directly on a blockchain because they might not be connected, but the information will start spreading out in a more trusted way.
And my personal focus has been on Bitcoin because I think that's a critical piece to this puzzle. Is that in order for people to build and retain wealth and create economic development, you need to have really strong property rights, so that people don't have their resources taken from them by whatever means, legal or otherwise. And that's, I think, something that the blockchain and Bitcoin in particular really radically advances, and it will facilitate a lot of economic development in the future as it continues to grow, and that can be useful in any jurisdiction anywhere.
Yeah, and I would definitely resonate what Aaron and Trent were saying with looking at these larger problems like economic development or like real estate titling, and taking a really pragmatic approach, like you said, with issuing like a set of keys to a tribe or something that isn't necessarily all digital, but allows for them to interact in the digital economy. And the same thing with Bitcoin, kind of offering, really quality, usable applications that you can then go into is really spurring adoption globally.
Yeah, and just to add to that, just food for thought. One of the things that often prevents the financialization and the participation of the economy in emerging markets is the lack of collateral, right? If you don't have title to property, or if you have instability in government, for instance, my friend Laurent Lamothe was the prime minister of Haiti when they had their earthquake. He told me he watched just the entire building, the government building that held all the land titles, just washed into the ocean, right? And now everyone, there are 5 people that say they own each house. And so in general, if you can build those registries in a way that's trustful or trustless, depending on how you look at it, you can start to build people's ability to participate in the financialization aspects of the economy. And secondly, now that you have decentralized finance, which is kind of the big buzzword in blockchain right now, you can start to then have people that don't have a brokerage account, don't have an identity infrastructure, don't have all of the normal things that I have living in the United States, like pieces of paper that say my identity on them. Now I can start to participate in synthetic assets, in collateralized loans, in all those things that normally require money and lawyers and governments that are well functioning to execute. And I think you're seeing a leapfrogging from that aspect too.
I love these ideas, and so there's the financial aspect where they might want to leverage their land, but there's also people who just want to be left alone and maybe tied to the broader economy. But new technologies, starting with the internet, is giving people so many ideas of what can be done. And so as people are able to sign transactions and also assertions about their ownership, well, they can prove, hey, all of the people around me also support that. And then we can actually experiment with governance that way. Rather than some of the top-down structures that we have now. It's like people can do a little bit more picking and choosing hey, I want to, trust these set of rules over here, these standards. And we can start coming up with new standards and new ways to build the governance systems.
So,
and I would say that typically, to add a little bit to that, I feel like that typically starts with the non-custodial identity application, where people are autonomously reporting different types of information and interacting. If you get down at that very core level of bringing those people in by some mechanism, whether it's a smartphone or traditional mobile phone, I think that can kind of propel that capability for you to have that autonomous interactivity.
Yeah, and I also just want to make one counterpoint. I'm all for the decentralized, emergent, self-sovereign identity-based versions of these things and the experimentation that I think probably is representative of the spirit of why we're at this event here. But what I think most people in the West don't realize right now is that President Xi Jinping announced in November that China was launching their blockchain network. That they're going to run basically their entire economy on. And like China normally does, it wasn't anywhere, nobody knew about it. And then all of a sudden it's already done and it's rolling out June 25th. And it's called the BSN, the Blockchain Services Network. The DCEP is the digital RMB that they're launching that's rolling out at the same time. There are 200 something cities launching that have their own nodes in the network. There are going to be 415, I believe, 416 cities. Which are all the prefecture level cities by next year. There are billions of dollars in public funding to connect to it. And, if you want to do business with China, get on it. So, that's happening too.
Right. Yeah, I think that things like that are going to force digital transformation on both central banks as well as other people. Considering interoperability across the board is going to be really key in the next couple of years. And I think a lot of these institutions are actually going to be forced to do it, which is great for those of us trying to digitally transform things.
That is good. It's scary in another aspect because they're going to force, obviously, adoption of that. And some places are able to force, nobody can use these technologies. So it's not, I love cryptocurrency. I feel like we haven't won quite yet because there's so much that go in that totalitarian realm.
Yeah, I guess the idea is that you build systems that interact with those systems, but do not restrict the users in the same manner, some sort of API or microservices systems.
Yeah, and they do plan to, I think within the next year or so, and I'm sure most of it's already done, interconnect with the decentralized networks like Ethereum. I'm not that big of a fan of EOS, but they're connecting to EOS as well, so. I think what's really interesting, if you think about this in the abstract, is that you're going to have this closed top-down control economic footprint or economic sort of infrastructure that's been built in China, and you're also going to have these decentralized systems at the same time that are able to connect to it, and you're going to have this sort of like cyberspace evolutionary set of behaviors to see. Let's see what wins, I guess. Let's see how the completely controlled system versus the decentralized systems act. And I think right now, it's in the US and in the Western world in general, it's not just a bunch of kids anymore. At one time, it was mostly anarchists and kids. But, for instance, EY recently announced their platform Nightfall. And that's the main offering that they're giving to their big, Fortune 50 clients, is actually using the public Ethereum network in order to deliver blockchain applications to make tokens. Microsoft is also doing that as well. And, adding a privacy layer on top of it. You might have seen ConsenSys contributed Hyperledger Besu, which now is, interacting with JP Morgan's Quorum, which adds a privacy layer. So you're going to have basically a private public permissionless, but probably configurably permissionless system that real enterprises are launching on, And that's going to be plugging into things like China. It's going to be plugging into things like, other nations. Maybe maybe it could plug into Estonia's e-residency program. I think, you're going to see this cyberspace layer that's emergent above the physical commerce layer that gets put in place over everything. And I want to just put a stake in the ground for me too. While we're talking about special economic zones here, what I've always been into is, kind of John Perry Barlow's Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. If you've never read it, you should check it out. This is kind of the founding document of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, where he says basically cyberspace is a new jurisdiction. It's a new world, and let's not have the existing systems try to erode too much into the possibility we have there. So I think, what I'd love to see is the transition from normal nation state physical borders where, literally the guy on the horse telling you whether you can trade or not in this physical border is the useful part of it, the administrative construct, to special economic zones where we have abstract businesses, corporate structurings, governance moving into that, and then eventually to things like virtual economic zones, which is what we already have, but it's a little bit like amateur hour so far in the blockchain world. But as this progresses, I think we're going to see an extreme professionalization to the point where we have things like the governance institutes present on this at this conference, basically being the governance mechanisms plugged into the blockchain instead of other more simplistic mechanisms. So I'd love to see that transition, and I hope that we can support it along the way.
I thought it was.
So I would like just to add probably. Sorry, I don't know what is happening with. Well, I only joined now, but from my experience and adding to what you say, I see probably the biggest problem with eGov is definitely the lack of a global digital transformation perspective. So for instance, I've been working with a couple of central banks in Africa and a couple of projects, both in decentralized systems and more centralized systems. And there's a completely lack of even basic digital infrastructure. So I think some countries can actually leapfrog, or even communities, like what you're saying, for instance, IT, the fact that the entire building went down. But I think the challenge right now that I've been seeing is really on the infrastructure and on really basic stuff. For instance, we did an entire blockchain solution and an app for my company to a country in Africa. And then when you start applying it, everything was done. We realized that there was no infrastructure basic. So that means we would have almost to create the entire infrastructure on the country if you want people to use the platform. And for instance, it made me realize the lack of really basic global infrastructure. And I understand partly why Google and Facebook became so powerful, because the governments and the e-governance part is out of this. So there's a lot of, I think it's one of the things I would like to put in the panel probably at the last part, because we don't have a lot of time, is the challenge how all of us are doing software or solutions, but the lack of a system that can actually go to the right part. And I think, for instance, what China is doing right now with the blockchain network, BCN, which is massive, which is right now targeting 450 cities. And then, of course, they will go as well probably to Africa or no, but that's the kind of a schizophrenic level between the kind of advanced technology you're doing and the reality. So how do you see that part of the infrastructure software? Because for me, that's the biggest challenge, is that it's like doing a spaceship, but you don't even have the infrastructure to put it in the air, or we become cyberpunks in a lot of ways, which you touch about some of the areas. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I would say one thing is that too often in the blockchain space, and I like that Sam brought up like EOS and a couple other scenarios where people try to master plan everything. They write these highly complex white papers that really focus on these different, really brilliant, well thought out plans. And the truth is you just have to build a very usable product that provides value add and improve on it. So I would say you kind of start from the ground up. You look at the infrastructure first before you even touch the products, then you kind of progress into the next stages of what you're building. But I think products particularly for governments who are interacting with systems ground up perspectives.
Yeah, and one thing, I don't know on your case because you are all developing very advanced cases, but for instance, the lack of very basic education really is one of the things that got me very scared working with multiple governments. I don't know, because for instance, when you look at the government, of course, the idea is to digitize simple service, like you said, the property registration, other things. But I don't know I think it would be interesting probably for our audience. Do you have case studies of, for instance, like you said, Bradley, that creating products, but as well creating the education that comes with the products? And I think that part is almost as important as the other. Demystify. If you look at M-Pesa in Africa, which is still the biggest money payment in most of the countries, and similar systems like that, it was very simple, but it works. And that, I think, there's nothing still that replaced that at least on a bigger scale. And I think that's the challenge. For instance, Bitcoin in one end is used, for instance, especially in multiple countries, as a guarantee towards the volatility of the money and as a security, especially Argentina or even countries in Africa. But then this infrastructure and education. So do you have any case studies on that? You touched some of the areas of IT. For any specific things that we can do, or Trent, or software developing, or Aaron, and what you're doing with Bitcoin?
I'll throw out on our side, we have a whole business arm that has sensitization, and we have to go into the areas to educate people so that they know and understand the trade-offs of what's happening. Another part you mentioned, you're scared about releasing things, and we have to talk internally and design things the right way, because it's really easy to do just what the government asks for, or what the people ask for, and then have it be manipulated later. So we're trying to do things in a non-custodial way, but still easy to use for people who want to go in the office.
Yeah, and for our part, our goal is just to build like the simplest tools we possibly can to create kind of that base layer that people can build other services on top of and can rely on. The simpler the software is, the more robust it is, the easier it can be a base layer building block for something larger that then comes later and gets built on top.
So I could mention a couple, and these are examples where something was kind of folded into the existing infrastructure. So Zug is a canton. It's kind of like a state in the U.S., but in Switzerland, it's divided into cantons. And ConsenSys built this system that allowed a digital identity to be connected to your plastic card identity, much like the Estonia program, but based on the Ethereum blockchain. And what it was a pretty simple education campaign where literally, when you go to the same place, sort of like a post office that you go to make modifications to your identity information. And, there's just a little pamphlet that says, you also get this thing, stick this in your computer and you're good to go when you're voting on these resolutions, which are very important to Swiss society to be able to vote on certain direct governance kind of mechanisms. Another that I can think of was actually in a refugee camp in Jordan. There was a project called Building Blocks, which used a biometric identity to be able to connect individuals to a wallet where direct aid was being given to people. And often, as you know, when there's aid going into an area, often a lot of it falls off the back of the truck, and you have no idea what happened to it. And so, this is a way for people to essentially just use their biometrics as a wallet, and it really didn't require too much education, just sort of giving people a very powerful tool, and they'll figure out how to use it.
Yeah, and I would say that I'm working on a project that's focusing on Latin America, particularly kind of expanding the use of digital currencies and non-custodial assets. And one thing that I've found that has been significantly more successful, and a lot of what people overlook, is understanding local sentiments about various different things and really educating them, in a way that will resonate really well with them. They don't need to know things running on the blockchain. They don't need to know they need to know that they're banking themselves. That's the message. So I think a lot of messaging goes really, really far when you're educating these points.
Yeah, I have 2 case studies that I think touch that and corroborate what you're saying, both of you. I think, for instance, I had a project in that I was involved in Brazil in a favela that is one of the most violent favelas in the world. And for instance, just doing a small app with the payments in crypto, and people, instead of going to, they have to go and pay for instance water and electricity, and using the app to make the payments would save lives. And it's a very simple thing, but it would save lives. So I think, and another case study is, for instance, something in West Africa, that, for instance, we did a case study with the fishermen, for a community of fishermen. And for instance, all of them were using, for instance, WhatsApp to make the payments, and actually to just inform their customers around the products they were selling. So, and what I feel right now is, like you said, Bradley and Sam, is that picking apps that exist and just putting solutions of payments on the top of that can actually make a completely difference. And then you don't need to have massive infrastructure in terms of servers and things like that. So that's kind of the point that I see. But one of the questions I would like probably to ask, especially because we're in COVID-19.
We're over on time, Dennis.
Okay, no worries. So, well, it was great to talk with all of you. Not much, but it was fantastic, at least part of it.
It's been fun. Good conference.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.